Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me today. I'm so excited to discuss with you today what turns out to be a very, very important subject in our culture today. So let me ask you first, how many of you here would like to learn how to create a successful relationship? Let me see a show of hands for how many of you here would like to learn how to create a successful relationship. That's what we're going to talk about today. I actually teach couples how to create lifelong relationships. Whether you're married, you're in a serious relationship, or even single and want to figure out how to create a successful relationship. This is really a body of knowledge that our society has been clamoring for. And what I do that's unique is I address marriages and relationships mentally and psychologically. That is what's new. When you do it that way, it actually works. So before I get started though, let me just real quickly go through with you my background. For one thing, I'm not a psychologist. I actually was raised poor. My dad was a cab driver. When I was 12 years old, I told my mom I wanted to be a Catholic priest, and then I discovered girls. So that whole career path kind of got derailed, but I happened to do well in school. I have an engineering degree. I went basically onto Wall Street. I became the first semiconductor analyst on Wall Street to focus on the communications market. So I'm very, very analytical. And at the height of the market in 2000, I met this girl I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life with. We met, fell in love. We'd actually known each other for about 8 years, but we were going to spend the rest of our lives together. Started fighting. And more importantly, when we went to the therapist and I realized the therapist wasn't helping, that I decided to take on this issue myself. So in fact, let me bring up Taylor Swift. Have you, I'm sure you know who Taylor Swift is, but do you realize that Taylor Swift actually, when she breaks up with a guy, she writes a song about it. In fact, there's a song I actually have on my phone. I know a guy my age with a Taylor Swift song on my phone, but it's about the red scarf. So if you've heard about the red scarf, it's actually a very good song. But she leaves the red scarf over at his house. At the end of the song, she talks about how he keeps it because it still smells like her. But as I've discovered, nerds don't write songs. We actually write books. So that's what I've done. I've taken this experience to write a book, and not only that. I can't sing. And it has taken my 16-year-old son, he was actually, I think, between 10 and 12. It took him about 2 years to finally teach me that I can't sing. Every time I would turn my music on, my son would tell me to turn it down or he would turn it off. I actually think he doesn't like my music because of that experience. But it took me 2 years to figure it out. Out of the mouth of babes, as they say. In fact, when I think about that story, it got me thinking about, imagine a single mother taking her date home and her date meets her daughter. Little 8-year-old Sarah looks up at her date. Hi, my name is Sarah. Nice to meet you. I just wanted to let you know that my mom likes the other guy better. the honesty of children, that's funny. But what I ultimately do is I teach couples that honesty. That's in essence what I go through. So I'm going to go through in the time that I have today and just highlight some of the more important concepts that I teach couples when I teach them how to create a lifelong relationship. When you understand what I teach, you'll realize the significance of this is pretty significant. So let me go through this. Here's the title of my book, Equality, the Quest for the Happy Marriage. And just real briefly to go through what we're going to go through today, I'm going to very quickly talk about the objective. If we were to sit down with a blank sheet of paper and design a successful relationship, what would that look like? And then 2 points that I'm going to talk about. We all know that communication is important in relationships. I do find it very interesting that no one's ever explained to us what that means, but I'm literally going to explain to you psychologically and mentally how to successfully communicate in your relationship. We're also going to talk about conflict resolution. In fact, here's one of my big reveals. The reason why relationships are successful is because couples get along. The reason why relationships are unsuccessful is because couples don't get along. As it turns out, that's the difference between success and not success. In fact, when you understand unsuccessful relationships, you realize that almost all of them are unsuccessful because of control. What I, in essence, do by teaching people how to successfully resolve their conflicts is I eliminate the need for control. I'm going to touch real quickly on actually the Carl Jung part of psychology, which is where we should be going. And then I'm going to basically explain to you why. Why, this is my bonus to you, this is my gift to you. Why are couples supposed to come together successfully and create a successful relationship? So that is the bonus. One of the things I'd like to warn you as I go through this, I'm going to be discussing mental concepts. So as much as you can and stay focused and attentive to what I'm talking about, your mind might tend to wander as I explain you some concepts. You might think about them from your own perspective. People tend to personalize these stories whenever I talk to them. So as much as you can stay focused on what we're going to talk about today, that would be great. But before I get started with the objective, though, let's just real quickly discuss the culture of our marriage today. I just want to go through this real briefly. But Martin Luther King was once asked what he thought was the problems in marriages today. And this was his oh so humble response. Maybe they could not get along because they didn't understand one another and were afraid. In fact, at the end of this, when I get into the conflict resolution, I'm going to directly address this concept of fear. And then another, Dave Matthews, an alternative rock singer of mine that I really love, but this is a quote from one of his songs called Angel. It's lonely, far from you, even when you're right by me. I find it amazing. I understand it psychologically, but I find it amazing that couples could be in the same room with each other, yet worlds apart. I see it every day when I work with couples and try and teach them how to create a successful relationship. But here is our culture of relationships today. In fact, this comes from a pamphlet called Common Sense that was published in 1776, and it's my chaos description. But our present condition is legislation without law, wisdom without a plan, constitution without a name. The mind of the multitude is left at random and seeing no fixed object before them. They pursue such as fancy or opinion starts. Nothing is criminal. There is no such thing as treason. Wherefore everyone thinks himself at liberty to act as he pleases. This is my chaos quote. In other words, you can argue over anything. And that is, there's no structure to our relationships today. I can't tell you how many times I show this quote to a couple and both of them are shaking their head yes. In essence, you can argue over anything. So what I'm doing in this conversation is that I'm in essence giving and creating structure for a successful relationship. So the first thing to do is we'll start off with the solution. If I were to tell you that we were simply going through a transition, that would make this conversation a lot easier than it is for most relationships today. And this book called The End of Patriarchy actually explains that. What the book is basically discussing is we're at the fourth and final stage in the relationship, in essence, between the mother, the father, and the child. A long, long time ago, the child was in charge. Women woke up and discovered feelings. They took over. Our society was matriarchy. And then men woke up and discovered thinking and logic, and they took over, and the society became patriarchy. And then basically what has changed is the education and employment of women in the 60s. And now we're trying to figure out how to create relationships based on equality. That's what we're looking for. In fact, one of the things that I do to explain the significance of this, let me ask you a question. Give me one word that you would use to describe the concept of equality in just one word. So what would that one word be? And usually when I ask that question, people give me fair or compromise or a real simple concepts that is the ultimate objective. But then the response is, imagine if you were a slave, that you were actually in bondage. Somebody owned you as a piece of property. What would you think equality would mean to you then? And that's where the real answer comes from, because the answer is freedom. What equality means is freedom. You have the freedom to develop into who you want to be, and your partner has the freedom to develop into who they want to be. Both of you win, and that is a very, very powerful concept. And how, in essence, do you create a relationship based on equality? And that's where you get into the concept of the partnership. And just to summarize with the time we have here, what a partnership is both of you have an equal say in the decision making of that relationship. And also you have your skill sets and your partner has his or her skill sets. That is what a partnership is. And when it comes to this notion that is often confusing in the conversation of relationships today, the notion of submission, what that literally means is you submit to your partner's skill sets and your partner submits to your skill sets. If you learn how to create a relationship based on equality, where you both have an equal say in the relationship, what you ultimately learn is how to take on the world instead of taking on each other. One of the most profound concepts that I teach people, if couples were to learn, instead of taking on each other, take on the rest of the world, they will learn that 1 + 1 is so much more powerful than 2. But just to summarize what that means, where there are no distinctions, there can be no superiority. Perfect equality affords no temptation for abuse or control. This is another very significant concept that I teach. Because in essence, what a partnership is, and I get this from the partnership between Bill Gates and Paul Allen, the two co-founders of Microsoft. Paul Allen looks like a nerd, is a nerd. I can say this, I'm an engineer, but he was the engineer. Bill Gates was the sales guy. It was to demonstrate the two different skill sets between Bill Gates and Paul Allen. But this comes from a book called Hard Drive, which discusses the history of Microsoft. And the way that the book is summarized is I view the relationship as something between two people that is in any relationship would require the two parties to work together to resolve issues that weren't anticipated, with the most significant comment there, issues that weren't anticipated. That is called life. We know that life's going to throw us curveballs. If we could only figure out how to solve those curveballs, our relationship will be much more successful. So what I want to do, I want to go through two things here fairly quickly, but one of them I want to talk about is communication. And I'm going to show you communication in one slide. And I'm going to ask you to answer the question that you see in this one slide, and that is, which is correct? So obviously you see the guy on the left, he's looking at the pillars, he sees 4. The guy on the right, he looks at the pillars and he sees 3. And so when you look at that, you realize that the correct answer is that both of them are correct. But what I'm explaining with this slide is what's most important to understand for successful relationships is understanding your partner's perspective. In fact, I host a 2-month weekly workshop. I'll get into the details about that at the end of this, but this is when I work in detail with couples. And at the beginning of every weekly session, I always ask the same question: what is the most important thing that I'm teaching you? And I'm doing it until they learn that that answer is understanding my partner's perspective. And the way I describe that, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When most people see this, they look at the pursuit of happiness, but what I'm doing is I'm breaking down life and liberty. Life is a moral concept taught to us by the church. All life is precious. And when it comes to relationships, life is morality, and morality is empathy or understanding your partner's feelings. Equality or liberty, on the other hand, that is a political concept. It's teaching us equality. And in relationships, equality is respect or understanding your partner's thoughts. If you understand your partner's feelings through empathy or understanding your partner's thoughts through respect, you will really have the keys on understanding a successful relationship. And when you don't, this is a quote from Carl Jung's autobiography. Those of you that don't know who Carl Jung is, he's the one who actually learned how the mind works much more profoundly than Freud did. One of my ultimate goals is to finally replace Freud with Jung. But this is a quote from Carl Jung's autobiography, and just what he's talking about with the anima and the animus is the anima is the vision in a man of a woman, and the animus is a vision in a woman of a man. What we're doing when we're dating is we're looking for somebody that matches the vision of who we're looking for, an animal in the man and the animus in the woman. And when we find that person, that's when we fall in love. When our vision matches the person we meet and their vision matches the person they meet with us. And so what he's saying in this quote is the anima and the animus manifest themselves most typically in personified form in the irrationality of a man's feeling and a woman's thinking. So what he's saying here is when relationships don't work out, what happens is the man shuts his feelings down and the women shut your thinking down. That's when the communication breaks down. Of course, when I go through the workshop, I will explain this in a lot more detail. But communication, what's most important to understand about communication is understanding the other person's perspective. Understanding their feelings is called empathy, and understanding their thoughts is called respect. And when you don't do it, this is what's going to happen to you. And so now, real quickly, what I want to also go through is the concept of conflict resolution. And this basically summarizes it. Disagreements versus arguments. In fact, the way I like to describe this is if you and I start a business together, okay, and I'm the accountant and you want to buy a $5,000 computer and we can't afford it, that's a disagreement. In fact, what's so fascinating when you describe it that way is you know that we're both going to understand each other's perspective. There's no emotional content to understanding each other's perspective. When the issue is understanding arguments, and the difference is that disagreements are logical, disagreements are problem solving, and disagreements are forward looking. Arguments, on the other hand, arguments are emotional, arguments are fault finding, and arguments are backward looking. And so then we need to get into understanding the concept of arguments. And this is when the real insight comes in. Because the reality is, as this quote says, to argue with a person who has abandoned, who has renounced the use of reason is like administering medicine to the dead. I love this quote, another very profound quote. Once your conversation goes from logical to emotional, you're done. You cannot solve an argument. But what I'm doing here is I'm explaining to you how to bring an argument back into a disagreement. And here is the real insight. What this in essence is doing is it's adding a psychological conversation when there are conflicts. And there's a process that we go through that leads to an argument. It begins with an insecurity, as you see here. Again, mom and dad got divorced. Now you have a fear or an anxiety, which leads to a prejudice, which then leads to being judgmental, which then leads to anger. So what I want to do is I want to step through this. Again, insecurity is not confident or sure, beset by fear and anxiety, which then leads to a prejudice. One of the things you're hearing first here is our mental troubles turns out to be prejudice. So I have a very profound conversation that I go through during the workshop of how prejudice influence our relationship, but our prejudice are our preconceived opinions. Again, like mom and dad got divorced, now you bring that prejudice, I call them relationship prejudice, you bring that prejudice into your own relationship. And what's good about prejudice is we have such excellent resources that we could use as examples to teach us about prejudice and the influence on us. And in fact, the best example that we have is Martin Luther King. In fact, the best book I would ever recommend is the biography of Martin Luther King, because it discusses how one is dealing with conflict when the other is trying to control him. And in fact, one of my favorite Martin Luther King concepts is the concept known as civil disobedience. This was a philosophical concept of an American philosopher in the 19th century by the name of Thoreau, who's basically explaining that you can disagree over anything as long as you're civil about it. When couples learn civil disobedience, it adds such a profound impact onto their relationship. So if you want to learn how to create a successful relationship, I would highly recommend you understand the concept of civil disobedience. But just getting back to the hierarchy of the argument, prejudice leads to being judgmental, characterized by a tendency to judge harshly, which then leads to being angry or being judgmental. And it took me years to figure this out. But what this concept is ultimately explaining to us is that fear is what results in anger. If you were to understand that when your partner's getting mad at you, they're getting mad at you because of some fear, then you know to address the fear instead of the anger. Let me give you a quick example to demonstrate what I'm talking about. You come home late from work and your partner gets mad at you. Okay, this is the thing that took me forever. Now, you've got to be doing the right thing. If you're out drinking with your buddies, that's not going to work, because what I'm doing in essence is I'm neutralizing the fight or flight syndrome. Because what you'll realize is when you get home, if you're doing the right thing, but you still get in trouble, it has nothing to do with you. You're addressing the anger, which is what most couples do. But what I'm doing is teaching couples how to go back and understand the fear, which is something from your past. Now you're understanding the psychological motivation of what causes conflicts. Again, something very, very important for couples to understand. Because our goal is not to seek love, as this quote says. The goal is to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you've built against it. It comes from a thing called a book called A Course in Miracles. And here's ultimately the goal. The goal is to make conscious what is unconscious, or else it appears as fate. And so real quickly, one of my goals is to introduce Carl Jung, his autobiography, Memories, Dreams, Reflections. And here's the goal that Carl Jung solves. The problem is how to overcome or escape our anxiety, bad conscience, guilt, compulsion, unconsciousness, and instinctuality. Because as we all know, you have to be happy with yourself first before you can be happy in a relationship. Because ultimately, and when it comes to personal development, a balanced ego is not when you're better than anybody else. It's when you're better than you used to be. When you go through this mental development, what you ultimately learn is that you are the only one that defines who you are. Nobody else does. That our mental problems come from other people defining who we are. Ultimately, what we're trying to do here, one of the most powerful art pieces from Burning Man, a sculpture of two adults after a disagreement, sitting with their backs to each other. Yet the inner child in both of them simply wants to connect. Age has many beautiful gifts, but one thing we could live without is the pride and resentment we hold on to when we have conflicts with others. The forgiving, free spirit of children is our true nature. Remember this when you feel stubborn. And in order to do that, what I'm going to explain here, this is the bonus. This is why you're supposed to create a lifelong relationship. And how you do it is when the child inside of both of you gets to come out and play. It's called Roses, a Love Story. Red roses were her favorites. Her name was also Rose. And every year her husband sent them tied with pretty bows. The year he died, the roses were delivered to her door. The card said, "Be my Valentine," like all the years before. Each year he sent her roses, and the note would always say, "I love you more this year than last year on this day. My love for you will always grow with every passing year." She knew this was the last time the roses would appear. She thought he ordered roses in advance before this day. Her loving husband did not know that he would pass away. He always liked to do things early, way before the time. Then if he got too busy, everything would work out fine. She trimmed the stems and placed them in a very special vase, then sat the vase beside the portrait of his smiling face. She would sit for hours in her husband's favorite chair while staring at his picture and the roses sitting there. A year went by and it was hard to live without her mate, with loneliness and solitude that had become her fate. Then, the very hour, as on Valentine's before, the doorbell rang and there were roses sitting by her door. She brought the roses in and then just looked at them in shock, then went to get the telephone to call the florist shop. The owner answered and she asked him if he would explain why someone would do this to her, causing her so much pain. "I know your husband passed away more than a year ago." The owner said, "I knew you'd call and you would want to know. The flowers you received today were paid for in advance. Your husband always planned ahead. He left nothing to chance. There is a standing order that I have on file down here, and he's paid well in advance. You'll get them every year. There's another thing I think you should know. He wrote a special little card. He did this years ago. Then, should ever I find out that he's no longer here, that's the card that should be sent to you the following year. She thanked him and hung up the phone, her tears now flowing hard, her fingers shaking as she slowly read her card. She saw inside the card, she saw that he had written her a note. Then, as she stared in total silence, this is what he wrote. Hello, my love. I know it's been a year since I've been gone. I hope it hasn't been too hard for you to overcome. I know it must be lonely and the pain is very real. Or if it was the other way, I know how I would feel. The love we shared made everything so beautiful in life. I love you more than words could say. You were the perfect wife. You were my friend and lover. You fulfilled my every need. I know it's only been a year, but please try not to grieve. I want you to be happy even when you shed your tears. This is why the roses will be sent to you for years. When you get these roses, think of all the happiness that we had together and how both of us were blessed. I have always loved you, and I know I always will. But my love, you must go on. You have some living still. Please try to find happiness while living out your days. I know it's not easy, but I hope you find some ways. The roses will come every year, and they will only stop when your door's not answered, when the floor stops to knock. He will come 5 times that day in case you've gone out. But after his last visit, he will know without a doubt to take the roses to the place where I've instructed him and place the roses where we are together once again. Pretty profound, exactly. What I am in essence doing is I'm elevating your marriage as the #1 priority in your life. When you understand the significance of that person that you sleep next to every night, it completely changes the dynamic of your marriage, the dynamic of your relationship. And so how I do that, as I've been saying, I have a 2-month weekly workshop. In fact, one of the things that you learn is I have, in essence, quickly summarized for you roughly half. I still haven't even touched on the second half of my book. And ultimately, the goal of my workshop is to put a permanent imprint of success on your relationship. And what I'm going to do in this next phase is I'm going to eliminate arguments. That's in essence what I'm doing here. That's a first. I don't know of anybody else that actually explains that. I'm going to discuss healing with you, the whole notion of forgiveness, how you go about doing that. I actually address forgiveness from 4 or 5 different directions in my book. I'm going to explain psychology from a new perspective to move the industry into the 21st century by introducing Carl Jung to most people. Most people don't know who Carl Jung is. I'm going to explain how the mind works. By the way, this is a first as well. No one's ever figured out how the mind works because people haven't been following Jung, they've been following Freud. I will also explain to you the psychological cause of divorce. That is also a first. I will discuss with you the most significant experiences that you're supposed to go through as an adult, the psychological steps as you grow through as an adult. That's when we get into the real personal development stuff, where you understand what you're supposed to be learning as you become more and more mature, as you age and you learn as you grow. And ultimately what I'm doing is I'm neutralizing the power drive, the need to control. So this 2-month weekly workshop, I normally charge $13.95 for this, but for people that are attending this seminar, I offer a $500 discount. So my seminar or my workshop is $895. So there's a discount code that will get you for signing up. That discount code is called marriage. And I also give 4 hours of free one-on-one work so we can get into the details of a successful relationship. So what I'm doing here is I'm explaining to you how to create a successful relationship by addressing relationships mentally and psychologically. And no one's done that before. This is a very profound concept. If you want to learn this, please understand that investing in your marriage is a good thing. Think about all the other things that you invest in. This is an opportunity for you to finally understand those concepts that you need to learn in order to create a successful relationships. And when you do it mentally and psychologically, it actually works. And obviously, I just went through real quickly for you those concepts. But what I'm going to do when I'm done here is you can meet me at the end of the room in the back of the room here, and I will walk you through how to register for the workshop. So I look forward to meeting you at the back of the room, and please join me. My mission is to lower the divorce rate in this country, and I'd love for you to join me as we go about doing that. Thank you very much for your time.